Let's talk a little bit about politics. It is the Republican National Convention. J.D. Vance was announced as a VP 2 days ago, and people are, digging deeper into who J.D. Vance is, and then people want to understand as it becomes more and more evident. Occam's razor, thank you. Occam's razor basically says simplest explanation is usually the true one. So people are looking to Vance, but they're also looking into what is a second Trump administration going to look like? It's probably not going to look like the first Trump administration, but in what ways is it going to be different? What makes it different? So let's look at a little bit of that. So people are asking Trump and trying to figure this out. And then how's Trump going to deal with the conflict zones out there? That's another big one that the whole world is kind of holding their breath to try to figure out and try to analyze. So here's just something I want to read you from Vance that he said, I think 2 years ago, that gives you a little flavor of how out there Vance is and how much of a new right figure he is. So this is what he said. I think Trump is going to run again in 2024. I think that what Trump should do, if I was giving him one piece of advice, is fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, and replace them with our people. So here's the difference between me and Vance, right? I would say fire every one of those mid-level bureaucrats and keep them fired. Who needs them? But he says, replace them with our people. That is, Vance is not against administrative state. He's against administrative state run by the left. He's okay with the administrative state run by the right. This is, by the way, the more interesting part of Project 2025 is not so much their policy statements, which are irrelevant because policy will be determined by Trump, not by the people at Project 2025. But what's interesting about Project 2025 is the amount of vetting they are doing for personnel. They have 3,000 people ready to fill jobs in government, to replace them with our people. So this is not about more freedom, limited government, shrinking government, fire them so we have smaller government. No. This is about control. And the control not being by the bad guys, that is by the left, but control needs to be on the right, from people on the right. And if that kind of control, they're fine with. They have no problem with. Our people, replace them with our people. Anyway, he goes on. That was the milder thing he said. He goes on and says, quote, and when the court stops you, stand before the country and say, and here he's quoting Andrew Jackson, the Chief Justice has made his ruling. Now let him enforce it. The Chief Justice has made his ruling. Now let him enforce it. So what J.D. Vance's advice to Donald Trump is, do whatever the hell you want to do. And if the courts rule against you, ignore them. Just ignore them. What are they going to do? Is the army going to come in and force you to go by the courts? In other words, make me. In other words, to hell with the American system of government. To hell with checks and balances. To hell with the role of the judiciary. Really, what J.D. Vance is saying here, unequivocally, is to hell with the Constitution. To hell with the Constitution. Constitution doesn't matter. The court's interpretation of that Constitution does not matter. The court's interpretation of law does not matter. What matters is you, Donald Trump's ideas. That's it. Now, if this isn't authoritarianism on a scale we have not seen in this country, we just have not seen in this country. And this is J.D. Vance, who was just nominated vice president. So if you thought, okay, Trump can be crazy, Trump has these authoritarian tendencies, Trump does these crazy things, but we have a good system. We have a system of checks and balances, and we can survive his authoritarian tendencies. And he survives. He surrounds himself with people who are generally decent, who respect the Constitution. They won't let him do the crazy stuff. And then you hear that the vice president is going to encourage him to ignore the Supreme Court. Literally ignore the Supreme Court. That is something. That is something. That should make you really afraid of a Trump victory. And then he continues. He says, we're in a late Republican period. Now, late Republican period is new right code for, end of the Roman Republic. Waiting for Caesar. Waiting for Julius Caesar to cross the Rubicon and basically establish himself as a dictator. We're in a late Republican period. The Republic is in decline. Only a dictator can save us. Only a Caesar can save us. And he continues, if we're going to push back against it, we're going to have to get pretty wild and pretty far out there and going directions that a lot of conservatives right now are uncomfortable with. So if you thought a first Trump administration was a little out there and a little wild, I think that's nothing. I think that's nothing. I think we're entering into really, truly for the United States of America, uncharted waters in terms of how crazy, nutty, authoritarian, ignoring the rule of law this administration could very well be. Could very well be. Now, as I said, people are trying to get an understanding of what Trump is thinking about his second administration. He's being interviewed by a lot of people, giving a lot of interviews to try to figure out what his positions are going to be. So, for example, here's one where he and J.D. Vance will probably butt heads. I'm on Trump's side on this one. Trump wants to bring the corporate tax rate down to as low as 15%. 15%. Now that would be amazing. J.D. Vance, on the other hand, agrees with Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley just gave a speech at the National Conservatives where he advocated for raising the corporate taxes. He literally said the worst thing Trump did, the worst thing that the Trump administration did was lower the corporate tax. And Vance agrees with that. Vance has commented that lowering the corporate tax is bad. So it'll be interesting to see how Trump can get a majority. He'll have to arm twist he'll have to arm twist some Republicans in order to get the corporate tax lower. But J.D. Vance does not support lowering the corporate tax, so that'll be interesting. Trump does not want to ban TikTok anymore. It's not for banning TikTok, another good thing. I mean, in this interview, Trump says a bunch of good things, right? More moderate things that, we'll see. For example, Trump said he'd consider Jamie Dimon, the chairman of J.P. Morgan Chase, to serve as Secretary of the Treasury. Can you believe that? I don't know if Jamie Dimon will accept, but Jamie Dimon being Treasury Secretary for Trump is pretty wild, right? I find it hard to believe Jamie Dimon is pro-tariffs. I find it hard to believe that Jamie Dimon is pro a lot of the industrial planning, central planning, government intervention that Trump advocates for. I think on economics, Jamie Dimon is probably one of the best choices you could have for Secretary of the Treasury. I'd probably vote for him for president, certainly over Trump. But I just don't see Dimon and Trump, getting along in a second administration. Maybe in the first, but not in a second. I think Dimon is way too, he's not a free marketer, but he's way out too far on the side of a free marketer than Trump. Trump, during this interview, was kind of talking a lot about William McKinley, who raised enough revenues during the late 20th century through tariffs to avoid imposing an income tax. Now that's, I've talked about this in the past, that's just sheer unadulterated economic ignorance on the part of Trump. But of course, Trump is one of the economically dumbest people I've ever heard speak publicly. So it doesn't surprise me. But, I don't think Jamie Dimon buys into any of that. So that'll be interesting. Trump is also uninterested in the U.S. protecting Taiwan. He actually talked about Taiwan as stealing America's chip industry. So he thinks Taiwan owes us, the nation of Taiwan owes the nation of the United States. He said he has no interest in protecting Taiwan, that he's not going to. Indeed, TSMC's stocks, after this interview was published, dropped 2.4% on the news that a Trump administration would not be interested in protecting Taiwan, and indeed views TSMC as having stolen the technology from the United States, stole our chip business, and therefore, quote, this is Trump, should pay the U.S. for defense. So if we're going to defend Taiwan in any way, Taiwan should pay for it. Trump continued, Taiwan doesn't give us anything. I mean, Trump's understanding of trade is more primitive than a 6-year-old's, basically. Yeah. Anyway, so Taiwan is fearful. Of course, Trump also said that he has no interest in Ukraine, and he also said in the interview, by the way, and here I think he's just lying, that he would never pardon himself. That if he was convicted of a crime in one of the federal cases, that he would just serve his time after his presidency, but he's never gonna pardon himself. I think that's a bull-faced lie. Anyway, I don't think we have anything really positive, much positive, maybe there's some positive, to look forward to in a Trump administration. That's my bottom line. And I don't think anybody knows what a Trump administration is going to look like. Again, I think a lot of really, really negatives from the idea of J.D. Vance being vice president. I think that's scary. But vice presidents don't really matter that much. So it's more, what is Trump going to do while in office? And the reality is, I don't think anybody knows. I don't think I know. I know I don't know. I don't think Trump knows. I think he's going to play by ear. I think a lot will depend on who he lands up hiring. For example, if he hires Jamie Dimon as his Treasury Secretary, things will be a lot better than if he brings some MAGA guy into Treasury. So hard to tell at this point what a Trump administration. Sometimes he says really good things, like let's lower the corporate tax to 15%, but then you listen to J.D. Vance, who wants to increase the corporate tax. So very difficult very difficult to assess where they go. The one things we know that Trump and Vance both support unequivocally, fully, consistently is that they're pro-tariffs and anti-immigration. Pro-tariffs and anti-immigration. Yeah, somebody says that Rome came down because they gave everybody citizenship. No, Rome came down because of Christianity, because Christianity weakened its moral core, and that's what destroyed Rome. But that was after the Republic, right? I guess you're talking about the Republic itself. Republic itself came down because it was corrupt and it was open to a dictator, ideologically open to a dictator. There was no real ideology of and Mika says, Mark, by the time Caracalla was in charge, democracy was not in living memory. Yeah. All right, I'm not going to argue with you guys about Roman history, but I will say that Christianity had a big role in the end of in the fall of the Roman Empire. I'm on the side of Gibbons on that one, for what it's worth.